You're listening to the Business Breakfast. Good morning, 21 minutes past 7.
The markets on Dubai Eye 103.8.
With Dubai Islamic Bank Business Banking. Open a DIB rewards account and make your business rewarding every day. #ready for business.
Yeah, it's a funny one on the stock markets. Overnight on Wall Street, all the main indexes rising. Looks fine. Nasdaq up nearly 1.5%. However, earnings after the bell, particularly Snap, which owns the social media company Snapchat, put the cat among the pigeons. That stock down 26% in after-hours trading. Results disappointed, and Snap becoming the latest tech company to say we are slowing down on hiring. So futures for the Nasdaq lower right now.
Commodities.
Oil a little lower than where we were yesterday, but we are still fairly steady around that $105, $106 band. We have had reports out from the US of weaker gasoline demand in driving season. There are, of course, concerns about supply at the moment as well. It is gold, however, that is catching our attention this morning at 17.13 because it is not doing what it says on the tin. It is not acting as an inflation hedge at the moment, or at least investors maybe don't seem to be as interested in it. One reason for that might be the higher dollar at the moment, which makes gold less attractive to those buying in other currencies. It might also be rising interest rates as governments across the world hike rates, therefore making bonds potentially a better bet. Our next guest is nodding. He may know something about this.
You're listening to the UAE's #1 talk radio station.
This is the Business Breakfast on Dubai Eye on 1.
Let's talk global economics now. Delighted to welcome into the studio a friend of the Business Breakfast. He is a partner with the National Transformations Institute at the consultancy Kearney here in the Middle East, Rudolph Lohmeyer. Rudolph, good morning. Nice to have you with us.
Good morning, dear Richard.
So we're talking global economics, but not the nitty-gritty of 50 basis points or 25 basis points from the ECP, the bigger picture issues that governments are wrestling with, and that is your bailiwick. You've got surging inflation at 40-year highs. You've got wildfires across Europe and other places as well. You've got Lake Mead in the United States shrinking to a puddle, it would seem, at the moment, close to Las Vegas and the Hoover Dam. And, of course, you've got a war in Ukraine and a global pandemic. So you've teamed up with the World Government Summit, the big event here in Dubai that happens every year, to produce a new piece of research that says this: governments now face a radically altered landscape of uncertainty, featuring challenges and opportunities that are not just unfamiliar, but in many cases structurally novel. First of all, in simple terms, what's the problem they're wrestling with?
They are wrestling with something you and I discussed 2 years ago for the first time. It's a critical juncture. In plain language, it's a short period of time in history when a vast amount of change is happening. That's what that feels so strange. We're not imagining the way the world feels right now. It is genuinely in a state of very unstable transition from something we've known to something that is really deeply uncertain. And in that context, they've got to make decisions, new decisions they haven't had to previously make. And those decisions will carry longer-term consequences than in any other period.
Okay, there are many of them that you list. You look at things like strategic shocks. You look at the metaverse, cryptocurrencies. You look at anti-corruption technology. There are so many of them. Pick out a couple of highlights for me.
You bet. Well, and maybe the categories are useful. First, government leaders have to be prepared for a series of what we call strategic shocks. These are discrete events that may occur, and Brandy just outlined one of them that is upon us already, which is how do you balance managing inflation with the ongoing growth imperative? And it's extremely challenging. The other category of change are these widening divides. Polarization is arguably the fundamental driver of what we're seeing in the world in countless places. One example, to your point, is crypto. To what extent do countries harness the innovation and the financial inclusion of crypto versus focusing on central bank digital currencies, which they can govern and which bring some order? But then there are also opportunities in this environment. There are policy accelerators, new ways of doing things to make progress more quickly. One of these we call passion engineering. How do you orient new forms of purpose in society? Because we are not going to solve the problems we're facing just by government. They've got to mobilize their people to solve these problems.
You've been inside government fixing these problems. You worked at the State Department for several years before you joined Kearney as a consultant. What happens inside the machine, Rudolph? How difficult is it to make this happen in a huge, cumbersome bureaucracy like the State Department, and every country's got one?
Forgive me, but that's just a brilliant question, and it's the essential question. And the answer to it is what will separate the countries from succeed that those that don't. The answer is that in so many governments, so many government institutions, they are mediated by so many layers of bureaucratic process to make a decision and political process in the United States that they cannot adapt quickly enough. So part of why all of us who are here in the region are privileged to be here in the region is that the region understands the imperative of speed in decision making. And so the answer is for governments that their internal obstacles to rapid decision making are killers right now, because these decisions have to be made today in order to shape the next 5 years.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say some of these issues that we've articulated, the pandemic, inflation, war in Ukraine, whatever it may be, governments should ignore them. They should think long term. You've got Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia. You've got here in the UAE a number of different plans, including the Next 50, which was the initiative launched in 2021, looking for the next 50 years after the Jubilee, looking to 2071. That this is just noise, and actually the key to success is to leave that to one side, set your strategic objectives long term, and go for those.
I am a long-term planner by nature, by profession. I couldn't agree with you more. Investments in capabilities have to be long-term and disciplined. But that's the thing. We're in the midst of a storm. And when you're in a hurricane, you can't simply consider your long-term strategies and the path you set for them to be steady. So now we're in a world where in the period between now and their realization, these next 3 to 5 years, the decisions you make about those long-term investments will be crucial. What do I mean? Take the war, the conflict. Countries now have to face an increasingly difficult decision about how do you deal as a small or medium-sized power with two great powers that may be at war. I mean, we're seeing, of course, the conflict in Europe, but Taiwan remains a real risk. And so for the countries that trade with both China and the U.S. and the West, how do they determine do they have to choose sides, or can they perhaps find a way to be a value-adding bridge between them? So the answer is long-term is crucial, but if in this particular moment in history you don't make decisions to make sure that those long-term strategies remain robust, they're likely to fail.
We saw very quickly President Biden here in the Middle East, was it less than a week ago now? I don't know, a few days ago, in Saudi Arabia, meeting with, of course, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, but also with President Mohammed from the UAE here. And then we had Mohammed bin Zayed in Europe, and we know we have close ties with China here. How is the UAE navigating this?
I think, as always, very skillfully. And to your point about long-term planning, they started a long time ago. The navigation is saying, we stand for the rule-based system. We believe in that. We believe in order, but we also believe it can't be established without connectivity. And we are a globally connected and connecting power. By taking that position, they become an asset to even adversaries. And so I think they're navigating it very well. I will say, however, that a fist bump I've discovered over the last week has entirely different meaning than it did a week ago.
Fist bumps and handshakes, they are different things, aren't they? Last thing, one of the things you highlight is widening divides, including economic divides. Incredibly wealthy city that we live here. In some places, Rolls-Royce is driving down the beach road, and yet you go to Al Quoz just a few kilometres away. Very, very different. People earning a few hundred or thousand dirhams a month in many, many cases. How on earth do governments address that?
Over this next 18 to 24 months, this is going to be the central issue, Richard. As we all know, inflation is the cruelest tax. Inflation hits those that are poorest most. So both here in this country, although of course very insulated by its remarkable fiscal position, all of the GCC are so well insulated, but in the world, cities and countries with stark inequalities have to take steps to protect the poorest among them, because inflation is going to be a killer. And the only way inflation can be brought down is by increasing unemployment, effectively by inducing a recession. So you've got to make sure that that social safety net is strong.
Rudolph, always great talking to you. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for coming in to join us. Rudolph Lohmeyer is a partner within the National Transformations Institute at Kearney Middle East, the consultancy.
Coming up in just a few moments on the Business Breakfast, we are going to continue the serious grown-up discussions.
There are big grown-up stories to talk about today, 2 for the price of 1 in Europe. I'm speaking shortly to Stefan Gerlach. He's an economist, former Deputy Governor of the European Central Bank, about interest rates. You're crossing life to Europe. Why?
Because I'm going to be speaking to Christoph Ruhl, who is from the Centre of Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, but he is actually in Germany, which is important because Germany, of course, the heavyweight of Europe, the one arguably most affected if we were to see a shut-off in Russian gas. We'll be speaking Nord Stream 1.
Your ARN News.
With Etihad Airways.